Hey, good afternoon, y'all. It's Ned over at My Philippine Dreams, and to the E to the D over at MPD here with Angel. Michelle is out shopping for clothes or something. She took off. I'm not sure what's really going on. This is going to be the second part of trying to figure out cultural psychology in the Philippines. If you saw the first part, you'll see that we covered the introduction. We talked about the history, some of the socio-cultural influences that have affected the cultural psychology of the Philippines. And we also talked about pakikisama, which is smooth interpersonal relationships, sir. And we also talked about the impact that family has on cultural psychology in the Philippines, which is pretty strong. Today we're going to be talking about Amor Propio, which is basically, literally translated, it means love of self, or basically self-esteem. Hiya, which is shame. Amor Propio can also be considered face. When you look at the more hardcore Asian influences, like in China and Japan, it's more like face. Hiya is shame. And Utang na Loob, which is extremely important, it's a huge cultural psychology influencer, is basically a debt of obligation. It's something that you owe somebody. It's favors given and favors received. So that's what we're going to try to do today, because we're trying to understand why Filipinos do the things that they do. Why do they invite total strangers into their home for fiesta dinners? Why do they volunteer themselves to go off and work as OFWs in the Middle East for 20, 30 years? Why do they ask so many questions when you first meet them? Why do they have a problem accepting responsibility for their actions sometimes? Why do they say yes when they actually mean no? And why do they have such a hard time directly interacting with somebody? So that's what we're trying to figure out, and that's why I'm doing this series. It's probably going to be another series, because next time we have to talk about Bahala Na, we have to talk about Balat Sibuyas, colonial mentality, and a few other things. But right now, let's take a look at Amor Propio, Hiya, and Utang na Loob. And instead of looking at my face doing this, I'm actually going to put up a little slideshow, so at least you'll have something else to look at other than my ugly mug. So check it out. Here we go. Okay, so building on what we did already in Pakikisama, the introduction, talking about the history and the cultural influencers, and the impact of family, let's take a look at Amor Propio. Amor Propio is taken from the Tagalog. It literally translates as love of self. It's best described to us clueless Power Rangers, as self-esteem. Amor Propio is developed by behaving properly, obeying parents, maintaining smooth relations with others, that pakikisama we talked about, extending hospitality, giving selflessly of oneself, and stuff like that. When Amor Propio is violated by another person, Filipinos will typically feel embarrassment or shame, which is Hiya. We'll talk about that next. This is generally a state that they will always seek to avoid, even if they have to do extreme things to avoid it. Note that Filipinos can also violate their own Amor Propio by cheating on their wives, stealing, refusing to help others, not engaging in pakikisama, etc. Usually, shame will result in Filipinos shutting down while they internalize all the stress caused by actual or perceived transgressions. Sometimes they go tampo, which is, if you've been in the Philippines, you've experienced tampo. In extreme cases, violent reactions can ensue. This is why you don't want to be getting in arguments with Filipinos. Amor Propio can also be compared to the greater Asian concept of face, with those losing face experiencing the embarrassment of Hiya, shame. Or in China and Japan, they say losing face. And although it has much to do with specific expected behaviors, what you have, material objects, also play a role in Amor Propio. Thus, a seemingly borderline obsession with branded clothing and gadgets, iPhone, tablets, and the like. Even if they are bootleg replicas, which are very common here. So Amor Propio seems to be a combination of Spanish and more hardcore Asian face influences. Back to the clothing. I mean, they'll even wear, when it's brutally hot, when it's like a real field temperature of 110, they'll still have on designer jeans, nice blouses, clothes, hats. I mean, they'll wear winter hats with like branded logos on them. And a lot of it, if they can't afford it, I mean, a lot of the richer Filipinos, the rich Filipinos can afford it, and it's real, but a lot of the less fortunate Filipinos, they're basically wearing bootleg stuff. Next up, Hiya. Hiya is best described as shame, but some forms of it can also be seen as shyness. You hear about the Filipino sense of shyness, a lot of that comes from Hiya. Hiya occurs when a Filipino's Amor Propio is violated, and this can be like an actual violation or something that's just perceived as a violation. It seems to be another carryover from Asian influences where they, again, we refer to them as losing face. And Filipinos will usually do everything they can in their power to avoid this unpleasant emotion, up to including saying yes when they mean no and denying that they were part of any wrongdoing, even when directly confronted with evidence. Hiya can also come about when Filipinos are not obeying their parents and fulfilling the numerous expectations of pakikisama whilst maintaining their own amor propio. As previously noted, Hiya can also be seen in Filipino shyness. Part of the shyness, and this is something we'll talk about later, is a result of the colonial mentality in the Philippines, where things seen from away, typically the West, like the United States, are seen as superior to local commodities, up to and including some Filipinos thinking themselves inferior to Western foreigners. Finally, today we're going to be talking about Utang na Loob. And Utang na Loob is best described as a debt of gratitude. It's all about favors asked and favors returned, the reciprocity of that whole exchange. A lot of this factors into the corruption in the Philippines and why it continues. Also, pakikisama factors into that, but we'll cover that another time. Utang na Loob is experienced in the workplace, the community, but most of all the family, where obeying and taking care of one's parents is the #1 Filipino filial duty. Nothing is more important than family. The asking of favors is very common in the Philippines, and the reciprocity of asking for favors in return is also quite common. Filipinos venturing overseas for decades to support their family is just one example they will make in the face of Utang na Loob. And when one considers that there are approximately 2.5 million Filipino workers overseas, it's pretty easy to see the effect that Utang na Loob has on the entire Filipino population. Quick side note, I don't know if anybody saw the Anthony Bourdain episode he did on Parts Unknown, where he featured this woman named Aurora. She had worked 35 years overseas and was now back in the Philippines. It was like Christmas time with her grown family. It's an excellent episode. If you get a chance to see that, definitely check it out. I'll try to put a link down in the video description box that I think links to it. So that, in a nutshell, is basically Amor Propio, Hiya, Utang na Loob. Love of self, self-esteem, shame, and debt of gratitude, debts of obligation, which carry on and are a very significant part of Filipino cultural psychology. So that was my encapsulation of Amor Propio, Hiya, and Utang na Loob. It has a lot of influence on why Filipinos do the things that they do. If you have your own experiences with any of the topics that we've discussed, please leave it in the comments section. Also, check out the article that I published over at our website. It's pretty comprehensive. It kind of encapsulates everything that I've been talking about so far, and I think I did a pretty good job on it. It's one of the articles that actually put some time and effort into doing. It's kind of long, but I think it's pretty good. Like, dislike, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. Until next time, this is Angel and Ned over My Philippine Dreams. Take care, y'all.